All right, everyone, after a very, very long break that was sort of needed, depending on, you know, who you ask, but due to a very, very busy schedule, I am back and the Harsh Talks Hockey podcast has returned. Um, just in time for a very, very heated playoff race and a very, very heated President's Trophy race and a decent amount of storylines going on around the league. Um, so my apologies for the long wait, but we are back with another episode. It will be up on YouTube and Spotify for those who want to listen. Um, the YouTube channel is Harsh Talks Hockey, and the Spotify is also Harsh Talks Hockey. So go check those out. And let's get into today's show. All right, everyone. It is good to be back. Once again, welcome back to the Harsh Talks Hockey podcast. I am your host, Harsh. Today is March 25th. We are a little under a month away from the playoffs, the 2024 Stanley Cup playoffs, and it's looking like it's going to be quite the finish to the season. Um, it's good to be back. It's been a while. It's been a couple of weeks, but life gets in the way, and sometimes you got other things to attend to. But nonetheless, before we do get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to Mitchell Fox, Adam, and Abhinav at Intermission Sports. I had the pleasure of being on the Intermission Slapshot show, so that will be up soon. I will put a link to that in the YouTube page, and hopefully it will be up on our Instagram page at Harsh Talks Hockey. So if you're not following that, check that out and go look out for that episode. And hopefully we could have those guys on our show at one point. It'll be great. We've all heard from Abhinav. We've talked some Oilers hockey, but it'll be good to have some you know other guests on. Nonetheless, it is March 25th. We are like a little bit under a month away from playoff time, and it's still looking like a crazy race. There's a lot of stories around in terms of players, in terms of some big milestones, in terms of an MVP race. So you know what? Let's start with that. Let's start with the MVP race. If we look at our points leaders right now, we've got McDavid at 117, we've got McKinnon at 122, and we've got Kucherov at 123. Um, this has been a fun, race to watch, and it seems like every night one guy does something amazing, the other guy seems to catch up. For most of the season, it's been Kucherov and McKinnon that people have really focused on, and they have been the two front runners for a while. But it seems like McDavid, following that slow start to the season that all of Edmonton had, they are very back despite this weekend's results. But we'll get into that later. McDavid seems to have found his step again, and he is right behind both of those guys and catching up very very quickly. If we look at his season stats so far, he's got 91 assists. He could hit 100 assists this season, which is a very very rare thing to see. Um, in terms of especially in this day and age, with especially how high points have been. Um, a lot of it's a lot of the focus has been on goals, um, but this is becoming a very very fun um, MVP race. And in terms of McDavid himself being at 91 assists, we're gonna see how many players have really hit 100 assists in a season. You know, it's a very interesting stat in terms of the list, because you know out of all of the players who have had 100 assists in the season, Gretzky is responsible for the 11. It's happened 13 times. Gretzky is responsible for 11. The only other players who did it were Bobby Orr in 1970 and 71 with 102 assists, and Mario Lemieux in 1988-89 with 114. Since then, there has been only four players who have recorded 95 assists or more, but 100 assists put McDavid in a very, very elite company. So that'll be really, really fun to watch. But all the discussion has been around McKinnon and Kucherov, and I still think those are the two front runners just because of how impressive both they are both having as a season. And many want to give it to McKinnon because of just how ridiculous he is. That's not taking anything away from Kucherov, I'm sure. There is one thing I would like to point out, though, and that is the fact that if it wasn't for Kucherov, I don't think the Lightning are a playoff team this year, especially with that Eastern Conference. And I don't think they're in the position they are right now, so secure in that first wildcard spot. Um, and that alone is enough for me to want to lean Kucherov in this MVP race. And that's nothing to take away from McKinnon. He is an extremely valuable part of that Colorado Avalanche team, and he is an absolute monster to play against, and is a very well-rounded player. Um, who also happens to have a championship, even though Kucherov has two. But these are two world-class players. These are two top of the cream of the crop. You can't really say describe them any better than that. But just the impact that um the Kucherov has had on the Tampa Bay Lightning in itself is already crazy. I read a crazy stat somewhere on, I don't remember exactly where it showed that Kucherov is responsible for 50% of the goals that the Lightning have scored this season, and he has contributed to 50%, which is insane. And that alone is why I am leaning Kucherov, is because of the importance. Yeah, this team has Braden Point, who has 41 goals quietly and will probably get another 50 goal season with nobody really saying anything. Yeah, they have Stamkos, who's been okay. Yeah, they have Vasilevsky, who's not been at his game, but come playoff time, this is about as good of a roster as anyone can play. And I pray for the team that has to play them in the first round because they have the experience, they have the toughness, they don't really have the depth, but on that upper end, they are as good in terms of talent as any other team, and they will be a tough out in the playoffs. Um, but that has been your MVP race. McKinnon, on the other hand, at 122 points, is right behind Kucherov, um, and he's had an incredible season himself, which is you know impressive in itself, just the way he has played. But this Colorado team is really, really good. That's not just for him. I don't want to take credit away from what he has done, but 44 goals, 78 assists, crazy stat line. He he is on a much better team than that Tampa Bay team is for Kucherov, and he has a lot better of a chance of going deeper in the playoffs than that Lightning team. And this is where the debate sort of gets muddy and a little bit, murky and a little tough to really pick who you think is the true MVP for this race. Is it McKinnon, who is going to be probably going deeper in the playoffs on a better team, or is it Kucherov, who has taken a very mediocre team and single-handedly dragged them into the playoffs, and has a slightly tougher chance of going further in the playoffs this year? But it will be interesting to see who finishes with more points at the end of the season, and who ends up taking those awards at the end of the season. It's just one of the many really fascinating races going on around the league so far. Um, One of the other things I wanted to point out was the goal race. Austin Matthews is at 58. He will probably get to 60 at some point this week. And his chances of getting to 70 have started to slow down a bit due to a slower production in these past couple of weeks. But having another 60 to 65 goal year is impressive in itself, and he deserves to be tossed into that MVP discussion if he really starts to push to that 70 number. Do I think he will do it at this pace? No. I think down the stretch of the season, I don't think this Leafs team wants to put too much pressure on their players and have them well and rested for what should be a very, very fascinating playoffs to watch for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But right behind him, Zach Hyman and Sam Reinhart both hit 50 goals this weekend, and that is insane to say to someone a couple of years ago that Hyman and Reinhart would be your 2 and 3 in terms of all time goals. That isn't to take anything away from them. They're both really good players playing on really good teams. Um, the thing is, these aren't guys who make 50 plus goal scorer money and aren't considered the top guys on their team. If we look at Sam Reinhart, his cap hit is $6.5 million, which is a great value contract for a player who's performing this well, and he's on arguably what I would say is my Stanley Cup favorite this year, the Florida Panthers. They are a well-oiled machine. They are rough and tough. They have the scoring now. They have Tarasenko now. They get the goaltending. So Sam Reinhart has just been an added bonus to what is already an incredible team, and they are destined to go far in the playoffs and destined to win a cup, in my opinion. And he has been impressive to watch. A lot of people did not expect these two guys to be, your two stars. In terms of anything else that I wanted to say about Sam Reinhart is the fact that, he isn't the type of guy, who was known as like a crazy Florida goal scorer. He's hit 30 once before, I think, in his career. 33 or was highest total, I believe. But the one thing I want to say is, come playoff time, this team is going to look deadly, and Sam Reinhart is going to have a big part to play in that. He joins Pavel Bure as the only player to score 50 goals for the Florida Panthers in a season. So that will be really fun to watch. The other guy who hit 50 is Zach Hyman for the Edmonton Oilers. And there's been a little bit of discussion around how impressive this really is, considering the fact that he does play with Connor McDavid and that he does have, that ability to just get set up by the best player in the world. So, Connor McDavid is, and obviously we all know what Connor McDavid is, but the fact that he is, setting up, Hyman to such an extent is impressive in itself. And, I don't want to take away the credit that Zach Hyman has had for, the credit that Zach Hyman has gotten for, for his 50 goal season, because 50 goals is impressive in itself. But a lot of his goals, majority of his goals, have come very in close and tight around the crease. And people are saying that is because he's a McDavid merchant. Anyone would be a McDavid merchant. You put any player with Connor McDavid, they will perform. That should not be a reason to take away the success that Zach Hyman has had this season. That should not be a reason to take away the success that the Edmonton Oilers have had the second half of the season, even though they look to be slipping a little bit. They did end up dropping a very big game against Toronto on Saturday on Hockey Night in Canada, going down 5-0. That defense did not look ready. It reminded me of the team of early weeks in the season where they looked like a complete disaster. Nothing was going right for them. They go down 5-0 heading into the third. They're able to bring it back by scoring 3 goals, but Toronto just pots the game away with an empty netter. 6-3 is your final score for that. And there are still some very concerning questions, and that this game has, this game brought some attention to Ken Holland in terms of what the holes on this roster are, and to the coaching. And Chris Knobloch's been a really solid coach behind the bench, obviously, with this team, but this sort of brings to attention, some of the flaws that he should be working on heading into the playoffs for this team, because the Oilers are going to face teams that are much better and much more built for the playoffs than Toronto on a nightly basis. and they need to be prepared for that. You cannot have guys making $9.5 million, such as Darnell Nurse, dropping a game like that, taking stupid penalties. You cannot have Evan Bouchard, who is considered one of the best defensemen in the league, and the future of this decor for the Edmonton Oilers. You can't have him playing a game like that, and you can't have Stuart Skinner, you know, giving away goals like that. I get that a couple of them weren't his fault, but having guys like Bobby McMahon and Pontus Holmberg score twice on you is embarrassing, and to go back the next day and lose to the Ottawa Senators, who have, at this point of the year, the Ottawa Senators have one job, and that isn't to make the playoffs, it's to make sure that other teams don't make it. And I don't think the Edmonton Oilers are going to fall out of the playoffs, but I know the type of game that the Sens are going to play, and that was an example of it. And the Oilers dropped it, and they go back home off of a back to back, which was, a back to back with travel is pretty tough, regardless of where you play. But to drop a game like that against a team like that should be really concerning. So I think the Oilers are still good, and I think they're going to be fine, and they're still on track to be a successful team. This just sort of brings out some of the flaws on that back end. It shows that they don't really have the depth that decor needs. But nonetheless, congratulations to Zach Hyman. Congratulations to Sam Reinhart. And to hitting 50. You guys have been incredible this year. You deserve it. And it'll be a great finish to the season to see which one of these two guys gets to finish with more goals, and if they have any chance of catching up to Matthews, because while he is ahead by 8 goals, and it is Austin Matthews, you can never count out any of the other guys. The next topic I really wanted to cover was, everyone's been talking about the wild card race in the East. We will get to that. I wanted to talk about the fact that there is a Vegas versus St. Louis game tonight, where St. Louis sits at 79 points and Vegas sits at 83 points. This has some major implications for Vegas. If they drop this game, this puts St. Louis within 2 points of that, and striking distance of that second wildcard spot. And for a team that loaded up and is as talented as Vegas, and they are defending champions, that should be a real cause for concern. They need to get their situation under control really, really quickly, or they might be in deep trouble, because there are some teams that are looking to fight their way back in. Minnesota is at 77 points, that they want to make a push. Obviously, St. Louis tonight is going to be a big game in determining the momentum shift for the end of the season. Um, it should. I think the Golden Knights should be fine. They're too talented to not be fine. But it'll be interesting to see, because if they drop this game, a lot of players are going to feel that pressure. This is a team that was expected to perform. They have loaded up. This type of performance would be unacceptable to fall out of the playoffs. To be second wild card in the conference in itself is already a cause for concern for a team of this level and of this with having this caliber of talent. But you need guys like Eichel to perform. You need guys like Marchessault to perform. People are talking about how they put everyone on LTIR to save them for the playoffs. You need to make the playoffs first, and it's starting to look like it might not be a guarantee. Having guys like Hurdle and Stone on LTIR is great for cap circumvention if you want to have such a loaded roster, but you forget that these guys need to play in order to perform, and these guys need to get their legs ready for the playoffs. They will probably get a couple of reps in before the playoffs start, but it is a good idea to keep your eye out for how this race sort of goes on, because a lot of the attention has been on the East race, and we will get to that. Before we do get to the Eastern Conference, one more thing I wanted to mention. Congratulations to the Nashville Predators. You guys owe U2 and that Las Vegas Sphere a lot of credit, because this team has been a wagon since then. UC Saros is back. Philip Forsberg is back. Roman Yossi is back. Evangelista is playing great. Ryan O'Reilly's been such a good pickup for them now. This team looks like they might be. They're giving me an eighth seed inspirational vibes of a team that could come in, just mess around a lot of the conference and be another drag to play in the playoffs. I see them as sort of the Islanders of the West Coast, of the Western Conference, because of they're in no means on the West Coast for those who understand. For those who are thinking, Nashville is not on the West Coast by any means, but they do give off vibes of the New York Islanders in the Western Conference. They have a great defense. They have elite goaltending. With the Islanders having Varlamov and Sorokin, two great goaltenders. Um, Nashville has guys like Askarov and Saros. So for them, Nashville's got a really good thing going on right now. They are clicking. They have Lankinen playing as their backup right now, so and he's been pretty solid. But UC Saros is the type of goalie who can single handedly drag a Nashville team into the playoffs. Not that it looks like he needs to right now, but he can, and he will not only drag him into the playoffs, but give him a shot to win night in and night out. Um, this Preds team has been insane over the last. I think they have not lost a regulation game since February 17th, and on February 16th, they got smacked 9-2 by the Dallas Stars. And since then, they have just become a wagon, becoming, I think, number one in the league for first period scoring. And they have beat some really good teams and some really key teams on this run. They beat the Blues, the Golden Knights, the Kings. They have beat teams like the Wild, the Avalanche. Um, they have beat teams like they lost to the Wild in overtime though, but then they beat teams like the Jets and the Panthers, and they shut out the Panthers, and then they shut out the Red Wings in essentially the span of 3 days, and they play the Golden Knights next, and it'll be really interesting to see where that matchup sort of goes tomorrow. With Vegas being on a back to back, so people really need to see what this Vegas team can do to turn their season around, because they've got a couple of really big games, and if they somehow drop this will put some pressure on that Vegas roster and that Vegas team to find their legs and get their game going again. Um, Before we shift to the Eastern Conference, I want to talk about the President's Trophy race. If we look at the overall standings of the league, the difference between the first place team and the seventh place team is 1 point. Vancouver has 98 points. New York has 98 points. And then in third place, we have Florida with 97 points. In fourth place, we have Colorado with 97 points. And in fifth place, we have Carolina with 97 points. And then 6 and 7 are Dallas and Boston with 97 points each. This is going to be a fun ending to the season, and I keep telling you guys why. Um, all of these are cup contending teams. All of these are elite teams, and they all deserve to be where they are. They all have the roster to be where they are. Um, we all know what kind of rep the President's Trophy winners have on the playoffs, and what kind of rep President's Trophy winning teams tend to have, especially coming off of last season with Boston being historically good and dropping that series against Florida. So this is a very interesting thing to look out for. Um, I don't think it does really have a big effect on how teams perform in the playoffs. I don't think that the difference between the first place team and the seventh place team, that gap obviously in terms of points is really close, but I think in terms of talent is also really good. You can interchange any one of these teams and make them cup content and make an argument for why they can win the cup this year. So I don't really think the President's Trophy, winning team really has that big of an advantage, and that this race really, really matters to a lot of teams. Um, but it is really interesting to see that we have this tight of a race even at the top, and that there is a lot that is still at stake when it comes to playoff matchups and playoff seedings, and how the top 16 turns out for this year's playoffs. Um, we will not have a clear picture of who's playing who until the very end. Not like it has been last year, where I think only the Florida and Pittsburgh race was really the one key thing. I think a lot of the races at the top are also looking very interesting, and a lot of matchups will switch up. But nonetheless, I don't think it has major implications for a lot of teams. The one thing I did want to point out, and I saw this on X Twitter, NHL news, puck report NHL dropped. Um, the Vancouver Canucks can secure a playoff spot tonight. Um, and the first playoff spot if they win against LA and St. Louis loses to Vegas, or they get a overtime loss or a shootout loss, and St. Louis gets a regulation loss against Vegas. So, um, Vegas not only needs to win for themselves, but they need to win for Vancouver, for them to win. Get for Vegas to not only just get their spot secured, but also have Vancouver clinch the first um spot in the playoffs for this season. And looking back at September, nobody would have thought that Vancouver would have been the first team to clinch a playoff spot, but here they can do it tonight. So a couple of big games to look out for tonight in the NHL: Vancouver and LA, and then the other game being St. Louis and Vegas. Um, let's turn our attention to the East, to the wild card seed. This is still a very, very fluid situation. It seems right now that Washington and Detroit are sort of fighting for that wild card spot. Washington sitting at 79 points is 2 points back of Philly for that third spot in the Metro. I think Philly has now been added into the wild card mix officially, in my opinion, because of that proximity. Um, but your teams are Philly at 81 points, Washington at 79 points, Detroit at 78 points, the Islanders at 75, the Devils at 74, Buffalo at 73. And I really think that's all that matters right now. This late into the season, we've got about 10 games left for most teams, 10 to 11 games per se. Um, this is going to be a very fun ending to the wild card race. I don't know who really makes it because of how these teams have played. Every time it seems like one team takes the spot, they end up giving it up by losing, or another team wins. Last night we could see in the playoff race that Philly lost to Florida as they would, um, and New Jersey lost to or beats the Islanders, and Washington beats Winnipeg. So Washington takes over. But if we look at the night before, you know, Washington plays. When did they play? They played before that against the Hurricanes and beat them 7-6, and they just won't go away. The team they somehow find a way to stick around and be consistent towards this last stretch to some extent, with Ovi finding his game back, and Charlie Lindgren has been an amazing surprise for a team that had no expectations going in. But with this wild card race, it'll be crazy. It'll be interesting to see what Philly does. John Tortorella had scratched um, Sean Couturier over the weekend with no explanation, and people are trying to wonder why. But this is a very John Tortorella thing to do. I don't see what's the big hurrah around this. He's done wilder things than this before, but it kind of shows where the Philadelphia Flyers heads are at in terms of what they think they have to get going in order to get their playoff spot secured. Even if they don't make it, I don't think it'll be a big surprise for anyone. They have been an overachieving team this year, but it would be really nice to see, what this much time remaining in the season, that they find a way through. They've been in that third Metro seat for a while now, and it would be really, really disappointing for them to drop it this late in the season. The real race should be between the Islanders and the Red Wings and the Capitals, who are all fighting for that last wild card spot. And it seems like Washington so far wants it the most. Detroit deserves it. The Islanders would be great to watch, but if the one thing I wanted to point out is how do these three teams match up against, a Rangers or a Florida slash Boston per se, or even a Carolina, because it doesn't look like, we know which one of these teams is going to be number one in this division. The Hurricanes are 1 point back of the Rangers, and the Bruins and Panthers are tied for points, with the Panthers having one game in hand. So I think out of these three teams, if you're a New York or a Carolina or a Florida or a Boston, I do not want to see the Islanders. Like I mentioned, they give off Nashville of the East vibes. They have great goaltending. They are great on the defensive end, and they play a really slow and scrummy type of game that I think, especially for a team like Florida or Boston, will catch them off guard, because that is the type of game that Florida and Boston play, and even Carolina to some extent. You would want to look out for a Islanders team that is hungry, that is trying to gain some respect in the East, and trying to get back into that playoff conversation. They've been to a couple of conference finals, so they don't lack experience. They've been deep in the playoffs, so they know what it's like, and they will. And the one thing I've been trying to say this whole year is, with Florida being the favorites to make it out of the East, in my opinion, the one team that can beat them is the team that can play their game better than them. That's what we saw in the playoffs last year. They rough and toughed and grinded their way to the finals until Vegas could do that better than them. I think that Florida playing a team like, or Boston playing a team like the Islanders, will come across a team that can rough and tough better than them. So it'll be really interesting to see where where this playoff race heads. If I'm Philly, I think Philly matches up well against the Carolina. I think John Tortorella and Rod Brind'Amour behind the bench. I've been saying this, for a while. The coaching battles for this playoff, for this year in the playoffs, we're gonna have some amazing coaches to watch. We're gonna have Montgomery in the East. We're going to have Paul Maurice. We're going to have Sheldon Keefe. We're going to have Peter Laviolette. We're going to have John Tortorella. We're going to have Rob Brind'Amour. We're going to have John Cooper. So it's going to be fun to watch. Back to that Carolina versus Philly potential series. We'll be able to see, who do the refs hate the most, because those are two coaches that really, really get under the skin of officials, that really get under the skin of refs, that, especially for a guy like Rob Brind'Amour, you're not going to get calls. So it's really going to be interesting to see, where a series like that would end. I do think that as good as Washington has been, come playoff time, they would be the weakest matchup for any of those teams because of their style of play. I don't think OV has it in him to fight and carry his way through the playoffs. And as good as this team has been in the regular season, I think that they fall flat come playoff time. So it would be really much more fun to watch a Philly or a Islanders rather than a Washington, and even a Detroit too. Detroit's tough. We just saw Mort Sider fight Forsberg in that 1-0 tight game. That was a type of game that you will see in the playoffs, and to see Detroit hold on for dear life with that is a promising sign to some extent. It shows that they can play that rough and grind type of game. And they have the talent with DeBrincat and Kane. So I think even Detroit would be a great matchup for a lot of these playoff teams in terms of, who gives them the toughest battle. So it'll be fun to watch. Washington, I think, is still the weakest of those matchups, and I think Detroit or a New York or even a Philly matches up better against those top teams in the East. But slowly just wrapping up our little discussion here. The Before we round out our little episode today, I wanted to talk about the fact that the GM meeting happened a couple weeks ago or a week ago, and they brought up the idea of a 10 to 12 player NHL show that will be premiering this fall, and will have we'll be on Amazon Prime. We'll have 10 to 12 players. It'll be this fall. It'll show the behind the scenes of the NHL players to some extent, and coming from Gary Bettman himself shows that this is dedication from the league to get exposure. They understand that this is a aspect that they severely lack in, especially compared to the other top leagues in North America. We've seen how good the NFL show has been. We see that the NBA has come forward with something like this. I'm not too sure if baseball has anything like this. Drive to Survive is, I think, the model for a lot of these sports leagues because of how big F1 has become and how mainstream F1 has become, because of that show alone. So it'll be interesting to see. Some of the names that have been rumored are Bedard, McDavid, Draisaitl, Nylander, Matthews. I know the Leafs tend to be stingy on this type of exposure. We could tell by the Amazon documentary, that they do not want to give their players this level of exposure. But since this is something that's coming from the league, I think, we will get to see the better side of a lot of these players who don't really tend to show their personalities as often. But it'll be interesting to see who ends up making the cut and who doesn't, and who gets to show their best side. I think the players need to be involved in this and passionate about this project in order for this to be a success for the league. Nonetheless, that wraps up today's episode. I think we've covered a decent amount and had a good talk about what's happening around the league. It'll be a little bit more of just trying to figure out where the teams are headed towards the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to see what happens come playoff time. But nonetheless, thank you guys all for watching. It's been a pleasure, and it's good to be back, and I hope to continue posting consistently. I am Harsh, and this is Harsh Talks Hockey. Thank you all for listening.